This video is brought to you by Rapido. Keep watching or check the link in the video description to learn more. One of the simplest rules of Euclidean geometry is that a straight line is the shortest distance between any 2 points. If I want to go from here to there, the shortest distance is just the most direct path. But surprising as it is, public transit systems don't always obey this law. Sometimes the fastest way from A to B is by way of C. It's a sort of irrational geography. But how does that work, and how do we make sense of what can be one of the most confusing elements of transit networks? In today's video, I'm going to present you with some examples from Toronto and around the world where that's just the case. So let's dive in. Hey, I'm Reese, and this is RM Transit, a channel about the dynamics of public transportation. My interest in the issue of shorter routes that take longer started when I was laying in bed thinking about Toronto's future Line 5, which will run across the city from Kennedy to Mount Dennis Station, a distance of about 19 kilometers in 40 minutes based on the projected average travel speed. What's rather interesting is that Kennedy and Mount Dennis are both stations on the through-running Kitchener-Stouffville suburban rail line. And although the distance between them on the main lines is quite a bit longer at 26 kilometers, once Mount Dennis Station opens, the travel time should be around 35 minutes. It's actually faster. That means in the future, as GO train service in Toronto gets faster and more frequent, a passenger taking the trip across town from Kennedy to Mount Dennis Station will be better off skipping the Eglinton crosstown and taking the longer, less direct route. Now yes, that faster route will cost more money, a big issue with Toronto's rather impractical fare scheme that I'll talk about in a future video. But you'll also probably get a seat and a much more comfortable ride. But still, a longer route being the fastest route seems kind of crazy. Think about how that changes the geography of the city. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably like subways, suburban railways, and rapid transit systems the same as I do. And maybe the Toronto subway system in particular. So when I found out that Rapido, a well-known modeling company that has given you the model GO train, might be producing a Model G-class subway car from the Toronto subway system, I really wanted to see it come to fruition. Especially because if the transit model market turns out to be a big hit, who knows what other kind of models could come in the future. However, they'll only be producing a model if they get enough orders. And so while I already pre-ordered a model before any of this sponsor stuff, I wanted to see how I could partner with Rapido so that we could make sure they get enough orders to actually make this thing. So if you want a piece of Toronto transit history on your model train layout or on your desk or bookshelf, even as a memento of a city you once lived in, consider placing an order. So how is it that longer transit trips can actually be faster? Well, it all comes down to average speed. While the journey across Eglinton benefits from directness, the GO train journey benefits from less stops and higher top speeds, which means you'll be moving faster for more of the trip. And these kinds of situations aren't even all that uncommon around the world. For example, if you want to go from the airport to the city center in Copenhagen, it's often just as fast to take the much longer Øresundtog regional trains as opposed to the less comfortable metro. And in Hong Kong, a trip from Diamond Hill to Mei Fu on the Tuen Ma line is actually just as fast as on the much shorter urban lines, and you won't actually have to transfer, despite it being a longer trip. And for some trips crossing the Ringbahn in Berlin, it's actually faster to go around the city as opposed to through it on the U-Bahn. And once you open up the options to trams and trains, there are a lot of examples where a longer train route is faster than a shorter tram route, from Frankfurt to Geneva and Amsterdam. There are some basic rules which you can discern from these situations, which roughly go like this. 1. A slightly longer trip can still be faster if it has much higher travel speeds. 2. A longer trip can actually be faster if it has less stops, so a passenger will spend more time moving and less time stationary. 3. And of course, a longer route might be faster if it's much more frequent than a more direct but much more infrequent one. That extra time you get because the train comes sooner gives you extra time to catch up on the longer route. Essentially, what really matters for public transit is the distance you're traveling and the average travel speed. That's quite different from, for example, walking, where average travel speed is generally going to be very similar no matter what route you take, and so you're generally best off taking the most direct one. Now, this might seem like a minor thing, but it really isn't. Because of the skeletal nature of rapid transit systems, they literally change the structure and shape of our cities. That is, when you think about distance in terms of transit travel time as opposed to, well, actual distance. Rapid transit leads to time-space compression, where places that used to be far apart in distance are now close together in time. And the differential impact of this on a place can be enormous. You might ask, is this a disaster? I mean, Toronto is building a new crosstown line, and it won't be the fastest way to cross town. And to be fair, to some extent I do agree that this is a problem. But it's worth noting that Toronto's Line 2, which is a proper subway, also might not compete with suburban trains between Main Street Danforth and Dundas West Bloor if such a train service actually existed. The truth is, travel time isn't entirely out of the hands of transit agencies. If we added a bunch more stops to these suburban lines, well, the travel times would go up. But at the same time, if the Eglinton crosstown was the fastest way across the city, in the long term that might lead to severe crowding, which is a lot more expensive to manage on small underground tram trains than it is on above ground suburban trains. All of these things need to be considered in the long term to maximize the value of the transit network. And it's important to remember that the success of a public transit system isn't only measured in how far it moves people, but how many people it actually moves. Even if Eglinton is slower for journeys across the city, a dense web of interconnections and lots of destinations along the line might still allow it to move more people. If for each train journey across the line, several different trips can be served. Optimizing both the ridership numbers and the passenger kilometers on a transit system is a complex science, and one that doesn't just involve the transit system, but the shape and design of the city itself. I think that while the answers to these questions could be really complicated, we at least know where to look. What's really interesting are the problems we don't have great solutions for. For example, how can we tell a passenger at a station which route to take so they get to their destination fastest, without them having to pull out their phone and use Google Maps? How might maps be redrawn to reflect travel time, comfort, and costs as opposed to just geographic proximity and the layout of lines? These are questions I spend a lot of time thinking about. Thanks for watching.